Someone has to say it, the Horus Heresy is a tricky game to get your head round, particularly if you are a beginner. In this series, I want to create a series of detailed rules explanations, regardless of your skill level, to get you up and started with your first battles in the Age of Darkness. Welcome! Today I'll be focusing on the fundamentals of what you need to know about the Horus Heresy as a game, and some of the things that make it a bit different to other Games Workshop games. If you are completely new to tabletop war games, I recommend checking out part 1 first. This video will include reactions, weapon profiles, universal special rules, and some army building basics to get you started in your first couple of larger games of the Horus Heresy. Now, like the previous one, there's a couple of things I'd recommend you get your hands on if you're planning on practicing using some of the examples in this video. The things you'll need this time are some Blast and Flamer templates, and your army book. That's going to be the Liber Astartes for the Loyalists, or the Liber Hereticus for the Traitor Legions. Several other books will be coming out in the future, with the next one being the Mechanicum, but for now we're going to focus on these. Now, before we get started, I want to make clear that you don't need to include everything from this video in your games straight away. What I recommend is including a couple of rules at a time and playing a few games until you're comfortable. Just make sure that your playing partner is aware of what rules you're going to be including in your next battle. We're going to start with probably the biggest development in the Age of Darkness, reactions. Reactions are a way to keep both players engaged in the game, as you can actually respond to what your opponent is doing during their turn. We'll be covering the core reactions that every army has access to. By default, you can perform one action in each phase of the game, so make sure to use them wisely. Firstly, we'll look at reactions you can do in your opponent's movement phase. When your opponent moves a unit within 12 inches and line of sight of one of your units, you may declare one of two reactions: advance or withdraw. If you declare an advance, your unit may move a number of inches equal to its initiative towards the enemy that triggered the reaction. In this example, it's the Alpha Legion movement phase, and they decide to move their squad of legionaries within 12 inches of the Blood Angels. The Blood Angels declare an advance reaction. As they have an initiative of 4, they can move up to 4 inches directly towards the enemy. If you'd rather avoid getting closer to your enemy, you can instead take a withdraw reaction. This allows you to move a number of inches up to your initiative value away from the unit that triggered the reaction. In this example, it's the Blood Angels movement phase. The Blood Angels move towards the Alpha Legion. Not wanting to get tied up in close combat, the Alpha Legion declare a withdraw reaction. They have initiative 4, so may move up to 4 inches away from the Blood Angels, which means that they'll have further to charge later. If you're the reacting player, make sure to pay close attention to when your opponent moves key units or moves near your key units. The ability to outflank and outmaneuver your opponent is key to victory. Let's next look at the shooting phase reactions. When your opponent shoots at one of your units, you have a choice between two reactions: return fire or evade. Note that you don't have to declare these reactions until after wounds have been assigned and saving throws rolled, so make sure to save it for when your enemy is going to inflict the most damage. For return fire, your unit may make an attack against the unit that shot at them. Remember, this happens before removing casualties, so make sure that you shoot with all of your models, even ones that are about to be removed. In this example, the Alpha Legion declare a shooting attack against the Blood Angels. They've managed to wound with 6 hits. The Blood Angels can take their armor saves, and one of them has failed, meaning one Blood Angel will be slain. At this point, the Blood Angels are going to take their return fire reaction. I'm going to lay down the model that has already been slain because we know that he'll need to be removed after the return fire is resolved. The Blood Angels now get to return fire with their 10 bolter shots. They've managed to inflict 5 wounds on the Alpha Legion, who now again get to make their saves. They managed to save all but one, so in the return fire, an Alpha Legion legionnaire is slain. At this point, all the models are removed, and we carry on to the next shooting attack. You can see this reaction can be very powerful if your opponent is shooting at your big guns, so make sure you pay attention to what your opponent is doing. Alternatively, if your enemy outguns you, you might want to instead take an evade reaction. The evade reaction grants you the Shrouded 5+ special rule against all attacks that are coming in that triggered that reaction. We'll talk a bit more about special rules a bit later, but for now just note that the Shrouded 5+ special rule gives you a chance to ignore wounds if you can roll a 5 or more. In this example, the Blood Angels shoot at the Alpha Legion. They hit with 6 dice, and they then manage to inflict 4 wounds on the squad. The Alpha Legion may then take their saves, failing 2. At this point, the Alpha Legion player declares the evade reaction. They take the 2 failed saves and may now roll those dice, looking for a 5+ to ignore the wound. They manage to save one, that keeps one of the Alpha Legion legionaries alive. We can see the evade reaction saved a legionary for the Alpha Legion here, so it's really useful to keep in your back pocket, particularly when the enemy is shooting at you with big guns. Note that there are certain rules that will stop you from moving, and models that cannot move are not permitted to evade. Lastly are the assault phase reactions. Both of these happen after your opponent declares a charge on your models, after the charge roll has been made, but before any models are moved. One of 2 actions may be taken here: Overwatch or Hold the Line. Overwatch allows the reacting unit to make a shooting attack against the charging enemy. Note that this is at full ballistic skill, so it can be really powerful if you charge the wrong unit. In this example, the Blood Angels player is in the assault phase and is declaring a charge on the Alpha Legion. They roll their charge distance, and then the Alpha Legion player declares the Overwatch reaction. This then allows them to make 10 attack rolls against the Blood Angels. The second assault phase reaction is Hold the Line. The unit being charged makes a morale check. If successful, and the charge is successful, then that charge counts as disordered. Now, a disordered charge means that the unit does not get the extra +1 attack for charging at the enemy. It also means they won't get any special rules that rely on them charging into combat. If the charging unit fails their charge, but the reacting unit still makes their morale check, then all other units that attempt to charge that unit during this phase will count as disordered. The Alpha Legion declare a charge on the Blood Angels, needing a 6. They make it in with a 7. At this point, the Blood Angels player decides to react, calling a Hold the Line reaction. The Blood Angels player now makes a morale check, needing to roll equal to or under the leadership of 7. They pass with a 7. That means that the Alpha Legion's charge is counted as disordered, meaning they get no additional attacks from charging this turn. Now, those are all the basic reactions that you can make during the various phases of the game. Make sure you pay attention to what your opponent's doing and see if you can catch them out. There are 2 other advanced reactions that you may need to make at various points during the game, but as they relate to vehicles and deep strike respectively, we'll cover those in future videos. Next, we'll be looking at weapons and weapon types with a focus on infantry, so you can tell your bolters from your plasma pistols. First up, let's talk about armor penetration, also referred to as AP. Each weapon that your units are armed with are going to have different AP values depending on how good they are at punching through enemy armor. The AP value of a weapon represents the armor value that it can ignore. For example, a bolter has an AP of 5. This means that it ignores armor saves of 5+ or worse. Now, we've been ignoring this so far in our examples because our 3+ power armored Space Marines will always be able to ignore the AP of the bolter. However, here we have a sergeant with a power sword. The power sword is AP 3, meaning it will ignore the 3+ save of the Space Marines. This means that any Marine wounded by the power sword cannot attempt to save the wound with his armor. Now, in addition to armor saves, there are also other kinds of saves known as invulnerable saves. These are rarer to find on models and are not affected by AP. The trade-off is that often they require a higher roll on the dice to save the wound. As an example, this Terminator is clad in Cataphracti Terminator armor. That grants him a 4+ invulnerable save and a 2+ armor save. You can only ever take one save, either your armor save or your invulnerable save, so you'll only really be using the invulnerable save against AP weaponry that can ignore your armor. So now that we understand AP on weapons, let's look at some of the different weapon types that this AP can be applied to. When thinking of Space Marines, the poster boys of the Horus Heresy, it's hard not to think of their utilitarian main armament, the bolter. The bolter is an example of a rapid-fire weapon. Rapid-fire weapons make 2 attacks when they're targeting a unit that is within half of the weapon's maximum range. That means that whenever shooting at a unit within 12 inches, Space Marine bolters will be firing 2 shots each rather than 1. This is sometimes referred to as rapid-fire range, and note that it does apply on a model-by-model basis, meaning some models in a unit may be in rapid-fire range while others are not. In this example, 5 of the Blood Angel Space Marines are in rapid-fire range, and 5 are not. That means a total of 15 hit rolls are made, 10 for the rapid-fire Marines and 5 for the non-rapid-fire. The last thing about rapid-fire weapons is that when you fire them in the shooting phase, you may not charge during the next assault phase. Speaking of assault, let's talk about assault weapons. Assault weapons allow you to make a number of shots equal to the weapon's type. Unlike other kinds of weapons, you can still fire assault weapons and charge in the next assault phase. However, unlike in Warhammer 40,000, you cannot run and then fire assault weapons. Note that you always have to charge at the unit that you shot at because your attention is fixed on that unit. Next up is pistols. Pistols have similarities with assault weapons in that they can be shot and you can still charge during the same turn. In addition, if you are armed with 2 pistols, you may make shots with both of them during the shooting phase. Normally, models only get to choose to fire with one of their weapons. Note also that a pistol counts as a close combat weapon in the assault phase. If a model is armed with 2 close combat weapons in the assault phase, they get an additional attack. This makes pistols, combined with a melee weapon of some kind, a really powerful combination. Lastly, any attacks gained in this way are resolved with the melee weapon rather than the pistol. In this example, the Blood Angel Sergeant is going to fire his plasma pistol at the Tactical Marines. He is now still allowed to make a charge. After charging, the Sergeant will also get additional attacks. He has 2 attacks as a baseline, gains an extra one for charging, and then another extra attack for being armed with a power sword and a plasma pistol. This means he ends up with 4 attacks, which is especially deadly given that the power sword is AP 3, so will be cleaving through all of the Marines who won't get an armor save. Heavy weapons are normally chunky death dealers, but are quite heavy for infantry to lug around. If a model with a heavy weapon moves during the preceding movement phase, then they can only fire snapshots in the shooting phase. Firing snapshots means that the model fires with an effective ballistic skill of 1, meaning he'll be hitting most targets on 6s. If you fire a heavy weapon during the shooting phase, you also may not assault during the assault phase. Next, let's cover template and blast weapons. A weapon's special rules may say that it is going to require a template or a blast marker. When a model has one of these rules, instead of rolling a set number of hits, you instead use one of the templates to determine how many enemies are hit by the blast or by the flamer template. Weapons with the blast keyword cannot be used during reactions, as the risk of blowing yourself up is just too great. For flamethrower, also known as flamer type weapons, you use instead the teardrop shaped template. In this example, the Terminator is shooting at the Blood Angels with his heavy flamer. He shoots at the Blood Angels using the flamer template, meaning he can hit 5 of them who are covered with the template. This means he inflicts 5 automatic hits onto the squad. With flamer type weapons, there's another important rule to consider, the Wall of Death special rule. When firing reactions with flame weapons, you don't use a template to determine the number of hits, but instead roll a d6 and halve the result rounding up. So a 1 or 2 is a 1, a 3 or 4 is a 2, and a 5 or 6 is a 3. This is referred to as a d3. In this example, the Blood Angels have stepped too close to the heavy flamer of the Alpha Legion Terminator. When the Terminator overwatches the charge of the Blood Angels, the flamer rolls a d3. He's rolled a 6. On a d3, that's a 3, meaning 3 automatic hits go through onto the Blood Angels. Lastly, for infantry type weapons is the melee type. This type of weapon can only be used in close combat and cannot fire shooting attacks. There are other kinds of weaponry, including ordnance and destroyer, but as these are predominantly mounted to vehicles, we're going to cover them in the next video dealing with vehicles. Now that you can distinguish your plasma pistols from your flamers, it's time to move on to what really gives the nuance to the game of the Horus Heresy, special rules. Now before we begin, I'm not going to be covering all of the special rules in today's video. However, I am going to be taking a couple of examples which will give you an overview of the kind of thing you can expect from these powerful rules. Now these are probably where you're going to be predominantly using your rulebooks and army books, so I'd recommend taking the bookmarks for those books and putting them on the special rules sections. If you are interested in hearing about more special rules and how they might apply in your games, let me know in the comments down below, and make sure you like the video if you have learned something new. For my examples, I'm going to be using the Shrouded, Furious Charge, and Shred special rules. First up is Shrouded X. In the rulebook, it will say Shrouded X, but this can be replaced with any number you can roll on a dice. We've previously seen this in the Evade reaction with the Shrouded 5+ special rule. This means that when you see Shrouded followed by a number, the number in brackets is what you need to roll in order to get the special effect, in this case, the ability to ignore wounds. In the Evade reaction, we saw a Shrouded 5+, but other rules may give a Shrouded 4+, or even better. Rules like Shrouded are referred to as a damage mitigation roll. These take place after saves are rolled and allow users to attempt to shrug off damage. For this reason, they're often colloquially known as shrugs. Similar to this is our next example, Furious Charge X. This rule says that a model gains X additional strength in a turn when they have successfully performed an ordered charge. A model with Furious Charge 1 would gain 1 additional strength when charging, whereas a model with Furious Charge 2 would instead gain 2 additional strength. This makes the model much more deadly in close combat. Each rule will make it clear if the X refers to a dice roll or a stat modification like additional strength or attacks. Lastly, we have the Shred special rule. Put simply, this rule says that a model armed with a weapon with the Shred special rule may re-roll all failed wound rolls. This is seen on things like Lightning Claws and is really useful for amping up the damage of those units. The Shred rule shows that not all special rules have an X component, and some just need to be studied carefully in order to understand how they interact with other elements of yours and your opponent's army. Similar to special rules are unit types. Each unit that you'll see in the Horus Heresy has a unit type and sometimes numerous subtypes. So far, we've been dealing with infantry models, but you'll see rules for dreadnoughts, vehicles, flyers, and even the monstrous titans that stalk across the battlefields of the 31st millennium. In today's video, I'm going to be introducing the dreadnought, character, and independent character unit types. I'm going to be using these as my examples because they're probably the most common ones you're going to come across in your first few games, but make sure to familiarize yourself with any others so that you don't get caught out. Firstly, we've got dreadnoughts. These are treated like infantry in most respects, but due to their hulking nature, they have a few special rules which give them a bit of survivability on the battlefield. They can re-roll their saves against poison or fleshbane wounds, which are designed to take out infantry, and they also have the Fearless special rule, meaning they're never going to fail a morale check. Now, as with several other rules in the Horus Heresy, there is a downside to the Fearless rule. While they can never fail morale checks, it also means they're never allowed to use any special rules or reactions that will increase their save. In this case, that means that dreadnoughts cannot make the evade reaction. Lastly, if they're armed with multiple ranged weapons, like this guy is with his Gravis bolt cannon and inbuilt heavy flamer, they can always fire all of them during the shooting phase. For infantry, they normally have to choose one weapon out of their arsenal. Lastly, they can also always charge regardless of whether they've shot or not. Next, let's move on to look at characters. Characters come in two flavors: Sergeant style characters who start the game with a unit, and then independent characters who are a bit more flexible to move around the battlefield. All characters tend to have good leadership, and that means that you can use their leadership whenever you're taking a morale test for a squad. For example, the Sergeant in a Space Marine Legionary squad has a leadership of 8, while the rest of the unit has a leadership of 7. Whenever you make a morale check, you'll want to make sure you take it on the Sergeant, and this also means you'll want to keep him alive. Other than this, Sergeant type characters act very much like other members of the squad, except they'll often gain additional attacks or have access to some slightly more swanky war gear. One area where they differ, however, is in their ability to issue challenges. Now, most squads will normally include a Sergeant, so here I've included the Blood Angels Sergeant and now the Alpha Legion Sergeant as well. At the start of the fight subphase, the active player has the choice to issue a challenge, where their character calls out the enemy character to fight one-on-one. Only one challenge may be made per combat, and challenges can only be made against enemy characters. If you do not declare a challenge, then your opponent may declare one with their characters instead. When the challenge is issued, the character that received the challenge may either accept or refuse it. If they refuse the challenge, they may make no attacks at all in melee this turn. Their leadership characteristic also cannot be used when making morale tests this turn, as their brothers lose faith in the face of their cowardice. The character who issued the challenge may fight as normal. If a character is the last surviving member of a squad, they must accept challenges. If the challenge is accepted, move the combatants into base contact with each other, while remaining in unit coherency. All their attacks now directly target each other, and any other combatants may only attack them if there are no other enemies left in the combat. When one of the combatants in a combat is slain, any excess wounds dealt to them count towards winning combat, but cannot spill over to kill additional models. If both parties survive and neither side flees the combat, the challenge will continue to the next turn. Independent characters like this Praetor follow all the same rules as regular characters, but can also join and leave squads. To join a unit, move the character so it is in unit coherency at the end of the movement phase. And to leave, it simply needs to move out of unit coherency in the movement phase. Most special rules only apply to the character and not the unit unless otherwise stated, though you can still use a character's leadership for morale tests. So that's all the rules you need to get started with your first few games of Heresy. But before I leave you, a quick word on army composition. One of the things you're going to want to work towards is the Crusade Force Organization chart that you can see on page 281. Now, in order to form a force in the Horus Heresy, there is a minimum requirement of an HQ and 2 troops choices. But when you're just starting out, don't worry too much about this requirement, just make sure your opponent is happy for you to go with an army that doesn't meet these rules. Once you're happy with the basic rules as well as the reactions, start adding a few characters into the mix. This is a really good way of getting some narrative into your battles in the 31st millennium. Let me know who comes out on top in your skirmishes in the comments down below, and remember to like the video if you have found it helpful and you'd like me to do more like this in the future. Next time we'll be talking about vehicular support for our armies, but in the meantime, my name has been Ollie, this has been my hobby, and I'll see you next time.